The dog isn't even his. Harold borrowed his neighbor's golden retriever every morning, not for exercise, but because old habits die hard. After 30 years of hunting child predators for the FBI, retirement couldn't switch off what was burned into his soul. But this Tuesday morning would be different. This morning, Harold would discover something that would force him back into the darkness he thought he'd left behind. At exactly 7:15 a.m., Harold clipped the leash onto Max, the golden retriever who had no idea he was part of an elaborate surveillance operation. The dog wagged his tail, excited for their daily walk. Harold wasn't excited. He was hunting. You see, Harold hadn't told anyone, not his wife, not his daughter, not even his therapist, that he couldn't stop profiling people. Every face he saw became a potential suspect. Every unusual behavior triggered analysis protocols he'd learned at Quantico. Every parent-child interaction was automatically assessed for signs of abuse or danger. His wife Margaret thought he was finally adjusting to retirement. She'd watch him leave each morning with Max and smile, thinking her husband was finally learning to relax. She had no idea that Harold carried a small notebook where he documented suspicious individuals, license plates, and behavioral patterns. She didn't know that their bedroom closet contained detailed maps of Central Park with every bench numbered, every blind spot marked, every escape route highlighted. Central Park was Harold's territory now. For 8 months, he'd mapped every regular visitor, every jogger, every dog walker. He knew Mrs. Chun always arrived at 7:30 with her poodle, walking the same counterclockwise route around the pond. He knew the businessman in the gray suit cut through the park at exactly 7:45, always checking his phone, always in a hurry. He knew the college track team ran past at 8 a.m. sharp, their bright yellow uniforms visible from 3 blocks away. He knew the patterns because patterns were everything. In his FBI career, Harold had solved 17 child abduction cases by identifying disruptions in routine behavior. Predators couldn't help themselves. They were creatures of habit, even when stalking prey. But patterns could also reveal monsters. As Harold approached the children's playground area, his trained eyes began their automatic scan. Soccer moms setting up playdates, their attention divided between coffee cups and toddlers. A maintenance worker fixing a broken swing, his city uniform and ID badge clearly visible. College students jogging past with earbuds in, lost in their own worlds. And then he saw him, the man who would haunt Harold's dreams for weeks to come. Sitting on bench 47, Harold had numbered every bench in his mental map, was a man in his 40s. Average height, brown hair that needed cutting, wearing a navy jacket that was too warm for the September weather. His sneakers were expensive but well-worn, suggesting someone who did a lot of walking. His hands were clean, but his fingernails were bitten down to the quick, a sign of chronic anxiety that Harold had learned to recognize. But it wasn't his appearance that triggered Harold's instincts. It was what he was doing. The man was photographing children, but not in the way normal people photograph children. Harold had seen this before. During his FBI career, he'd studied thousands of hours of surveillance footage from predators. He'd sat in dark rooms analyzing the hunting patterns of monsters, learning to think like them in order to catch them. He knew the signs, the systematic way the camera moved from child to child, the focus on isolated children rather than family groups, the careful positioning to avoid parent sightlines. Normal parents photographing their own children moved differently. They called out names, smiled, interacted. They took multiple shots of the same child, adjusting angles for better lighting. They showed photos to other parents, sharing proud moments. This man did none of those things. His camera work was methodical, clinical, predatory. But Harold wasn't FBI anymore. He was just a 65-year-old retiree walking a borrowed dog. He had no badge, no authority, no backup team monitoring his radio. If he was wrong about this man, he could be arrested for harassment. If he was right and did nothing, a child could disappear. Harold positioned himself 30 yards away, pretending to let Max sniff around a large oak tree. From his peripheral vision, he watched the man with the camera. The subject, Harold's mind automatically classified everyone as subjects now, was focusing on a little girl, maybe 6 years old, who had wandered slightly away from her mother. The child had blonde pigtails and wore a pink dress with unicorns on it. She was playing with a small stuffed animal, completely absorbed in her imaginary game. Her mother sat on a nearby bench, talking on her phone, occasionally glancing over, but clearly distracted by her conversation. Harold's blood ran cold. He'd seen this exact scenario in case files. Predators targeted distracted parents and isolated children. This was how it started. The man stood up from the bench, and Harold's heart rate spiked. After 3 decades of profiling predators, he could read body language like most people read newspapers. The subject was moving with purpose, not casual observation. His shoulders were set, his stride deliberate. He was transitioning from surveillance to action. Harold had exactly 30 seconds to make a decision that would change everything. He could call 911, but what would he say? I see a man with a camera, near children, in a public park where photography was legal. They'd think he was a paranoid old man. The response time would be at least 10 minutes, far too long if his instincts were correct. He could approach the child's mother, but she might think he was the threat. A strange old man approaching her daughter could cause her to panic, creating chaos that the real predator could use as cover for escape. He could confront the man directly, but he had no badge, no authority, no backup. If the situation escalated, Harold could find himself in legal trouble. Worse, if he was wrong, he could destroy an innocent person's reputation. What Harold did have was something more dangerous than any badge: 30 years of experience hunting human monsters. Harold unleashed Max and let the dog run toward the playground. It was the perfect cover. A dog getting away from its owner gave Harold reason to run in the same direction as his target, creating a natural reason to be in the same space. "Max, come here, boy," Harold called out, moving quickly toward the area where the man was now standing just 10 feet from the little girl. As Harold got closer, he saw something that made his blood freeze. The man wasn't just photographing randomly. He was following a pattern Harold had seen in FBI training videos. The subject was documenting the child's routine, where she played, how far she wandered from her mother, what time the mother got distracted checking her phone, which direction she faced when sitting on the bench. This wasn't casual photography. This was reconnaissance. This was a predator mapping his target's vulnerabilities. Harold had seen this behavior in case files. Phase 1 was always surveillance, learning the target's patterns, identifying windows of opportunity, documenting escape routes. Phase 2 was approach, testing how close they could get without triggering alarms. Phase 3 was abduction. This man was clearly in Phase 1, possibly transitioning to Phase 2. "Excuse me," Harold said, approaching the man while grabbing Max's collar. "Did you see which way my dog ran? I'm so sorry if he bothered you." The man startled, quickly lowering his camera. No problem at all," he said, but Harold caught the nervous edge in his voice. More importantly, Harold saw him instinctively angle his body to hide the camera display, a classic deception behavior indicating consciousness of guilt. Harold had interviewed over 200 predators during his career. He knew guilty body language when he saw it. The micro-expressions, the defensive posturing, the verbal tells, they were all there. "Beautiful morning for photography," Harold said casually, his voice friendly, but his eyes watching every micro-expression on the man's face. He was employing the same conversational techniques he'd used in interrogation rooms, creating false comfort while gathering intelligence. Just taking some nature shots," the man stammered, which immediately confirmed Harold's suspicions. Innocent people don't stammer when discussing their hobbies. They light up, share enthusiasm, offer to show their work. The man was lying, and Harold knew it. Harold made a decision that would either save a child's life or destroy his own reputation. "I'm actually a bit of a photography enthusiast myself," Harold lied smoothly. "Mind if I see what you're shooting? I'm always looking for new techniques." The panic that flashed across the man's face was unmistakable. Harold had seen that exact look on the faces of dozens of predators when they realized they'd been caught. It was the moment when their carefully constructed cover story crumbled, when they understood that someone had seen through their deception. I need to go," the man said, starting to walk away quickly. But his movement pattern was wrong. Instead of the casual stroll of someone ending a pleasant morning in the park, he moved with the urgent, erratic gait of someone fleeing a scene. But Harold wasn't done. Harold was just getting started. Actually, sir, I think we should talk, Harold said, his voice dropping to the tone he'd used in FBI interrogation rooms. Calm but unmistakably authoritative. Because I've been watching you for 3 days, and I know exactly what you're doing. The man froze mid-step. Harold continued, moving closer but maintaining a non-threatening posture that wouldn't alarm other park visitors. Day 1, Tuesday, you sat on bench 47 from 7:30 to 8:15, photographing the playground area. You focused primarily on children who separated from their parents or guardians. Day 2, Wednesday, same bench, same time, but you moved to bench 52 when that little girl in the red jacket showed up with her grandmother, probably because grandparents are more vigilant than distracted parents. The man's face was going pale, but Harold continued his psychological assault. Today, you're back to bench 47 because you figured out the little blonde girl's schedule. Mother brings her here every Tuesday and Thursday at 7:45, sits on the same bench, takes the same phone call, probably work-related based on the duration and her body language. The child wanders in a predictable pattern, and there's a 12-minute window where the mother's attention is completely focused on her conversation. You see, I spent 30 years as an FBI behavioral analyst. I've studied predators like you my entire career. I know that you're not taking nature photos. There are no nature elements in your shot angles. I know that you've been documenting these children's routines because that's textbook predatory surveillance behavior. And I know that documentation phase usually lasts about a week before predators move to the contact phase. The man tried to run. That was his second mistake. His first mistake was choosing to hunt in Harold's territory. Harold might be 65, but he'd stayed in shape specifically for moments like this. More importantly, he'd studied escape patterns for 3 decades. He knew the man would head for the park's east exit, the most direct route to the subway and the path that avoided the main pedestrian areas where witnesses might intervene. Harold was waiting for him there. Here's what's going to happen, Harold said, blocking the man's path with the calm authority of someone who had cornered hundreds of dangerous individuals. You're going to sit on that bench, you're going to unlock your phone and camera, and you're going to show me every photo you've taken in this park. Then you're going to explain to the police officers who are currently walking this way why you've been conducting surveillance on children. The man looked around frantically, and that's when he realized Harold had been louder than necessary during their conversation. Loud enough for other park visitors to notice the confrontation. Loud enough for someone to call security. Loud enough to ensure witnesses who could testify to what they'd observed. I didn't. The man started, but his protest sounded hollow even to himself. I've heard every excuse, Harold interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades of experience. I've interviewed men who claimed they were just photographing the scenery while they had 10,000 images of children on their devices. I've sat across from predators who swore they were just lost when they were found hiding in school parking lots with detailed maps of children's routes home. Harold stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I've looked into the eyes of monsters who destroyed families and still claimed innocence. I've heard fathers explain why they had to hurt their own children. I've listened to teachers justify why they deserved special attention from their students. So whatever excuse you're preparing, I guarantee I've heard it before. Park security arrived just as Harold expected they would. He timed the confrontation perfectly, creating enough of a scene to draw attention, but not enough to cause panic among families in the area. Officers, Harold called out, I'd like to report suspicious behavior. This man has been systematically photographing children in this park for 3 consecutive days, documenting their routines and movements in a manner consistent with predatory surveillance. The man tried to protest, but Harold continued with the clinical precision of an expert witness. Check his camera and phone. I guarantee you'll find focused images of minors, taken without parental consent, with particular attention to children who separate from their guardians. You'll also find that the photos are organized in a way that suggests pattern analysis rather than casual photography. The security officers looked skeptical until Harold handed them his business card. It was an old FBI business card, technically expired, but still carried the federal seal and Harold's credentials. Harold Mitchell, Supervisory Special Agent, Behavioral Analysis Unit, Quantico. The man's shoulders slumped in defeat. He knew that his carefully planned hunting expedition had just turned into a federal investigation. 2 hours later, the man was in custody. His phone contained over 300 photos of children from 6 different parks across the city, organized into folders by location and labeled with dates and times. His laptop, seized from his apartment, contained detailed maps of school districts, playground schedules, and what could only be described as target profiles. Harold stood in the police station, giving his statement to Detective Maria Santos, when she approached him with an expression of amazement and concern. "Agent Mitchell, the suspect wants to talk. He's asking specifically for you. But I have to ask, how did you know to watch him? What made you suspicious in the first place?" Harold looked out the window at the city beyond, thinking about all the predators still out there, all the children still at risk. Detective, when you spend 30 years studying evil, you develop instincts that don't shut off just because you get a pension. That man exhibited classic predatory surveillance behavior. His positioning, his camera angles, his timing, everything about his presence in that park was wrong. But you were retired. You were just walking a dog. Harold smiled grimly. "The dog isn't even mine. I borrow him from my neighbor every morning because predators expect to see normal activity in their hunting grounds. A man walking alone might make them suspicious, alter their behavior. A man walking a friendly dog? I'm invisible. I'm just part of the background while I watch them." Detective Santos realized she was talking to someone who had turned retirement into a one-man child protection operation. In the interrogation room, the man, identified as David Chun, 43, unemployed computer programmer, looked up at Harold with a mixture of fear and respect. "How did you know?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Harold sat down across from him, the familiar rhythm of interrogation settling into his bones like an old song. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that reminded him of countless similar rooms where he'd extracted confessions from monsters. "Because I've been hunting people like you my entire adult life," Harold said, his voice steady and clinical. "I know that predators always start with surveillance. I know that you photograph children to study their patterns, their vulnerabilities, their moments of separation from protection. I know that what you were doing wasn't random. It was methodical preparation for something much worse." David nodded slowly, the fight gone out of him. "I wasn't going to hurt anyone," he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. "That's what they all say," Harold replied. "Until they do. Until the surveillance phase isn't enough anymore. Until watching isn't satisfying enough. Until they need more." The confession took 3 hours. David admitted to similar surveillance at schools, playgrounds, and shopping centers across 3 states. His computer contained detailed files on over 200 children, complete with schedules, family information, and vulnerability assessments. Police found evidence linking him to 2 attempted abductions in neighboring cities, cases that had gone cold because investigators hadn't connected the dots. Harold had saved more than one child that day. He had saved dozens. As Harold walked out of the police station that evening, Detective Santos stopped him. "Agent Mitchell, I have to ask, are you currently active with the Bureau? Because what you did today, that was professional-level law enforcement." Harold paused, considering how much to reveal. "I retired 8 months ago. Then what were you doing in that park? What made you focus on that particular individual?" Harold's answer would stay with Detective Santos for the rest of her career. "Detective, when you spend 30 years studying evil, you don't just stop seeing it because you get a pension. Evil doesn't retire just because I did. That man was going to hurt a child. Maybe not today, maybe not this week, but soon. I've seen this pattern too many times to ignore it. But you were just walking a dog." Harold chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "The dog isn't even mine. I borrow him from my neighbor every morning because predators are creatures of habit, but they're also paranoid. They study their hunting grounds for unusual activity. A man walking alone, especially someone my age paying attention to children, might make them suspicious. But a man walking a friendly dog? I'm part of the scenery. I'm invisible." Detective Santos realized she was talking to someone who had turned retirement into a sophisticated undercover operation. "How many others are there like David?" she asked. Harold's face grew serious. Aged by the weight of knowledge no one should have to carry. "More than you want to know, detective. More than the public could handle knowing. They don't stop because I retired. The monsters don't take breaks just because the hunters do. So neither can I. Are you saying you're going to keep doing this?" Harold looked back at the police station, then at the darkening sky, where somewhere other predators were studying other children. "I'm saying that some people retire from their jobs, detective. But I never had a job. I had a calling. And callings don't end with pension papers." As Harold walked home that night, Max trotting happily beside him, he thought about the little blonde girl who would go to sleep safely in her bed. Her parents would never know how close danger had come. They'd never know that a 65-year-old man with a borrowed dog had stood between their daughter and a nightmare. That was fine with Harold. Heroes aren't heroes because they seek recognition. They're heroes because they can't stop being heroes, even when the world thinks they're just ordinary people. The next morning, Harold knocked on his neighbor's door at exactly 7:10 a.m. "Mind if I borrow Max again today?" he asked. His neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, smiled warmly. "Of course, Harold. You two seem to really enjoy those walks. Max gets so excited when he sees you coming." If only she knew that Max was the perfect cover for the most important work Harold had ever done. At exactly 7:15 a.m., Harold clipped the leash onto Max and headed toward Central Park. His trained eyes began their automatic scan of the area, cataloging faces, noting unusual behavior, watching for the predators he knew were out there. Because somewhere in the city, another David Shun was studying patterns, making plans, targeting innocents. Another monster was convincing himself that surveillance wasn't really a crime, that watching wasn't really hurting anyone, that he would never cross the line into action. And Harold would be waiting for them. After all, retirement is just a word. Protection is a way of life. The hunt never ends. It just changes hunting grounds.